All right. So we're going to be taking a look at this Daryl Dawkins looking guy with these glasses that match this chick's hair and lipstick and glasses and shit. And the segment here is about cultural appropriation. This guy got an English professor who wields the language, who wields linguistics rather, in his fight for. He's an English professor that works primarily in African American studies. So, talk about the postmodern manipulation of language, if you will. Anyways, Dr. Phil's going to open up asking if anybody in the crowd has ever felt intimidated out of a hairstyle or cooking a particular dish because of fears of accusations of cultural appropriation. And this chick's going to raise her hand, and he's going to nod approvingly as she says she doesn't want to braid her hair. Obviously, she's aboard the agenda, so to speak. So, take it away, guys.
These are all celebrities who have been called out, criticized, and condemned for cultural appropriation. Has anyone ever called someone out for cultural appropriation? You too? You have? You have?
Oh, I have
anybody
to.
here ever thought twice about wearing something or doing something, even cooking something, out of fear of being accused of appropriation? You have?
Yes.
Yeah, what was it?
My daughter had braids and she wanted me to get braids that were just like hers.
Why her but not you?
All right, watch this guy nod. It's a little bit subtle. I think he probably knows he's on camera. He doesn't want to be super over with it. But he just nods approvingly, and he does it like twice here as she continues on.
Half black and half white.
Okay.
See, he turned around. He said, this is a white lady. He had to turn around so that he could assess her demographic factors in order to ascertain the range of acceptable opinions that she was allowed to have. And after that, he turned back around and she said, well, my daughter can have braids because she's half black, but I didn't think I could have them because I'm not. And he nods approvingly there. And it's beautiful. It's nice that he recognizes that he's the high priest in the room and he gets to determine who's in line with the ideology and who isn't.
I think that some things should stick with those cultures.
Well, no matter whether you believe...
He nods like a priest who just got a confirmation from a young boy that he's not going to tell his parents about what took place in the confession booth.
Harmful, or you think people should just be allowed to do what they want, there is no doubt this is a hot button topic that people are passionate about. Dr. Neil Lester, a professor of English at Arizona State University.
He's a professor of English at Arizona State University. And now, a large part of the postmodernist project is manipulating language in order to invert power structures. And what you're going to see here is that he's an English professor, according to what Dr. Phil just said. However, the next thing he's going to say is that he works primarily within the African American Studies Department. And, looking at him, I'm not sure if there's anything that would have indicated that could have been the case. But if you were to profile, maybe it would have been on your top 3 to 5 guesses or something like that.
Yes. And you've published, lectured, and taught extensively the area of African American studies.
It's a coincidence.
What do you think about appropriation? Do you think this is a real thing, something?
Wow, what a fucking question from Dr. Phil. What do you think about it, African American Studies and Linguistics, or English professor, rather? Do you think appropriation is real? Let's just tee it up for him, Dr. Phil.
People need to be cognizant of, and if so, why?
Absolutely.
Surprise.
Well, because if we in fact are trying to look at the humanity of other people, and we are trying to live in a place where we are trying to be respectful and mindful of folks, then we need to be aware of things that are important to other cultures that don't necessarily look like us or share the same values. So
why? Answer the question of why that's important. If someone is treating other people in a polite manner and with respect and dignity as individuals in everyday interactions, then what's the reason that they need to have this over-the-top respect, admiration, reverence, and indeed adherence to other people's cultures? He never answers that question. They're not going to get too in-depth because they know that the argument that they're making is primarily based upon manipulating anyone who would object into a position of shame and fear of being shunned by the wider community who's acquiesced to the emotional manipulation.
Thing, and people need to be aware.
Can anybody appropriate?
Anybody can appropriate, yes.
Not just white people.
Absolutely. Appropriation is intersectional. So old people.
Oh, the buzzword of the month there, intersectional. No, it was the buzzword of the month about 5 years ago, and really much longer than that. But so, he's going to give up this little bit of ground so that he can have the appearance of being somewhat fair, objective, and consistent. Later on, you'll see that he's willing to grant certain caveats depending on the demographic factors at play. For instance, as we discussed, he turned around, took a very brief glance. I mean, I'm not going to even take the time to rewind the video, but he took a brief glance at this woman, noted the fact that her skin is lighter than a paper bag, so to speak, and decided to, develop his moral calculus and his social justice calculus of her ability to have braids based upon that. So we'll let him continue here.
Can appropriate youth culture. Youth culture can appropriate old folks. People who are not incarcerated can.
Is there anybody else who is an influential thinker who sought to highlight the divisions between the old and the young? I'm trying to remember if there was a 20th century thinker and world leader who really highlighted the divisions between old and young and wound up killing 50 million people. I can't remember if that's the case or not. Anyways.
Prisoners or those who are incarcerated. Men appropriate women's attire for the sake of funny and mocking. So absolutely.
Notice he says they appropriate it for the sake of funny and mocking. He's not willing to, extend that criticism into the realm of gender criticality, because he knows that's kind of a third rail, and that's a contradiction. And he's not going to be able to make his racial point if he also highlights the point of gender criticality and transgenderism. Those are two just constantly intersecting third rails that ideologues of this type cannot mix up in the same conversation.
Anybody can do it, and everybody on some level may have flirted with it.
Okay, but a lot of the time that people that I've seen are called out for this, it's not that they were making fun or mocking in some way. It was just that they had adopted a fashion or a style or whatever.
I would say that's a performance. So if somebody's culture and somebody's identity becomes a performance, then it's reductive. So if you're reducing, for example, say the civil rights movement to an afro, and you wear that, or you wear dread.
If you're reducing the civil rights movement to an afro. See, here is a very... I paused it in between. I'm going to rewind it 5 seconds. He's about to do a very common rhetorical maneuver that you see from people who are trying to leverage their intersectional position or positionality. I'm telling all these words, and they are, but they're just made up academic bullshit. He is going to leverage his own. So this is what's known as an ethnonarcissist here. This guy's obsessed with race issues. He's obsessed with the idea that you can't discuss race issues in a certain critical, knowledgeable manner that needs to be respected unless you have a experience with race issues, and it just happens to be the experience that he's had. So that's very, fucking convenient. So yeah.
Example, say the civil rights movement to an afro.
There you go. So the civil rights movement to an afro. If you're reducing the civil rights movement to an afro, I mean, who the fuck is doing that? I'm not sure if David Duke on his worst day. I mean, did Martin Luther King have a fucking afro, or did Malcolm X have a fucking afro? Did any? I mean, who's the influential mainstream civil rights leader afro? Like, I'm sure there are some, but it's not John Lewis. The somewhat recently, the late senator or congressman or whatever he was. It's not Martin Luther King. It's not Malcolm X. Muhammad Ali, at the most, at some point, maybe had a afro. But no. So, the idea that anybody is, reducing the civil rights movement to an afro, as if they're saying in the bayous of Louisiana or the backwoods, villages of fucking Alabama. Oh, that fucking, that afro having Martin Luther King. I don't think that's a thing that's going on. No one's under the impression that the dude had an afro. I mean, maybe he did when he was younger, but I have no idea. Anyways, so what he does, though, in a moment here, after the afro thing, is he says, or dreadlocks. And I got on a little bit of a tangent there, but he says, or dreadlocks. And so he's personalizing the issue. And so that's the ethnonarcissism. You've got the ethno in that everything he said up to this point for a solid minute and a half has had to do primarily with his, maybe not that long, but primarily his, perspective as a black guy. And then it's going to shift from the black community generally to him within a matter of moments once he mentions dreadlocks. And that's going to project a certain amount of emotional weight on the conversation, where if someone wants to contradict him, now they're contradicting his experience directly. They're not just contradicting him on the level of some sort of, theoretical criticism. And so this is the emotional manipulation that takes place during these type of interactions.
Wear that, or you wear dreadlock wigs, that dreadlock wig where you do that because it's edgy, because it's cool, but ultimately because it's not you, and you're getting some kind of cultural capital from that by doing it.
And
you're getting cultural capital. Is that what it's called if you wear like a dope Bob Marley costume? Is that cultural capital? I'm not totally sure. Maybe it only counts if you're banging a chick of color.
who's hurt by that?
Well, it's not a matter of who's hurt by it, it's who's being...
Oh, so if no one's feelings are hurt, that doesn't matter. What matters is if some third party can leverage emotional manipulation out of the issue in order to gain some sort of advantage in terms of cultural influence. So if some third party is able to say, hey, this guy offended this fucking idiot, Neil Lester, with his pink glasses and his dreadlocks, with his dreadlock wig, trying to dress like Bob Marley and get hella ass at the Halloween party. This guy's offending him, and as a third party, I'm the rainbow-haired chick in the back, and I'm offended on his behalf. And you're not going to gain cultural capital with me because you're extorting his marginalized history by wearing that wig. You're gaining something. It's not that you just thought it looked good or something like that as a costume.
Respected by it.
Well, who's being disrespected by it?
The whole culture.
The whole culture is being disrespected. So, you know, if you've got your proverbial black friend or your proverbial Latinx friend or your proverbial fucking, non-binary friend or whatever, even if they're cool with you making jokes, you know, you're perpetually in like a Janice Ian, fucking whatever, Katie, whatever the fuck, Katie Haring? Whatever Lindsay Lohan's character was named in Mean Girls. You're perpetually in that situation where, you know, on one side you're able to make the joke and the other side you're not. It doesn't matter if nobody's offended. And so real life examples of this, he's explaining that it's important no matter if there's an individual offended or not. Real life examples of this include the Redskins having to change their name according to a fucking media circus. When polls of Native Americans showed that they weren't super offended by it. And then the same thing goes with the term Latinx, which I just used ironically. But that term, fucking most Latino people don't even know what the fuck that is. And yet, you know, certain enclaves of elitist, leftist culture will still assert that on the wider conversation.
People whose identities are wrapped in whatever you're dressing into and can then take off.
See, so what he did there is he talked about the people you're disrespecting are the people whose identities are wrapped into the costume that you're putting on. So when you wear your fucking mariachi outfit with your buddies and it's offensive, what this guy's actually doing is the racist thing on his side. He's reducing the lived perspective of anyone who happens to be, in my hypothetical with the mariachi, Mexican, to identifying their own Mexican heritage solely with the stereotype of the mariachi and being offended by it. And so, again, I mean, that's just a hypothetical, but that's what he's doing here. He's saying that if you wear dreadlocks and you're doing some Bob Marley shit and you're doing some Jamaican patois, if you were to do that, you know, even if a Jamaican person was not offended, you're somehow, you know, disrespecting the wider culture at large, and it's just simply a bullshit assertion that's meant to manipulate people emotionally.
You don't agree?
I don't. No.
You think?
And here we've got this lady who has an afro, so we'll see if she's reducing. We'll see if she points to her afro and says civil rights movement and then fucking slams the microphone on the floor. I have a feeling she won't do that, but we'll see.
About appropriation is a waste of time.
I think not only is it somewhat a waste of time, but it's nearly impossible. You just mentioned there are nearly hundreds of ways that one could appropriate somebody else's culture or their livelihood. And to expect any one human being to keep on top of that throughout their entire life, I think, is an unrealistic ask. And I think imitation. I appreciate my food by eating it. I appreciate the hair that I wear by wearing it, by putting on the clothes that I wear. And every single item around us in this room could probably be attributed to a certain culture. Do we have to constantly worry about what culture we
Does intention have anything to do with
Well, I
it?
guess I didn't hear anything about anybody worrying about it. What I hear about when I think about and talk about culture.
So when she critiques his points by asserting that someone must be worried about it, and that's pretty much, you know, similar criticism to what I was talking about earlier. If it's a victimless crime where Native Americans aren't mad at Redskins and Latino people aren't trying to use the term Latinx, what is the issue here? And he kind of explains why there is still an issue. And I use the term a lot, but it's an ideological assertion, and it's important that people, you know, gain the skill of fucking recognizing those in real time.
I didn't hear anything about anybody worrying about it. What I hear about when I think about.
I mean, he sounded worried up to this point about cultural appropriation, did he not?
Talk about cultural appropriation is people becoming more aware. But we could say the same thing about racism, sexism, homophobia. Just because you can't solve it and don't see it at every corner doesn't mean we shouldn't be aware of it and trying to address it.
Wow, do you really put those on the same level?
I absolutely
Racism
do.
and sexism, you put it on the same level?
So what Dr. Phil said there could also be phrased this way. It could be like, are you really trying to leverage the same emotional weight out of an accusation of cultural appropriation as you are out of racism? And because this guy is indeed trying to be this emotionally manipulative, he's going to say, yes, of course, obviously. He's going to react like it's a fucking ridiculous question. But, you know, Dr. Phil is playing a little bit of a character here. He's acting like he's a fucking idiot who doesn't understand what's going on. he's well aware of the fact that this dude's being emotionally manipulative. But, you know, this guy responds as if it's a fucking huge surprise. Let's revisit.
Do you really put those on the same level?
I absolutely
Racism
do.
and sexism, you put it on the same level as cultural appropriation?
That's exactly.
So if somebody wears their hair like you're wearing it,
Oh, we're talking about him now, so let's make sure we don't contradict what he says, because that could be offensive, and we're talking about him.
that on the same level as racism.
Absolutely. I put that on the same level as white supremacy because
So when he sees someone wearing dreadlocks, he puts it on the level of white supremacy. Because you know that thing that fucking skinheads do, grow dreadlocks. What the fuck is this guy talking about?
supremacy is intersectional.
Do you have a story or a question?
Yeah, they don't even keep it going after that because there's, you know, nothing to talk about. But anyways, we'll keep it there. I think we delved into that enough. But God, what a fucking bullshit artist. And thank you for checking it out if you made it this far.
Hey, click the link.
Ooh, wrong button.